Hi there, Randy Green here, and welcome to this series of podcasts where I'm going to talk about the extra systemics, as I call them, instead of calling them the aliens. So the headline of this one is called From Alien to Extra Systemics, and I have put down some headlines I want to do in this little series of podcasts. So why embark on that topic? There are so many out there, and some of you might not know, but when I wrote my first book, The Source of Humanity, in 2014, I was working with what we call the middle domain races or the regressed races. And there has been many different people giving many different accounts, both personal encounters, but also what we could say encounters from extra dimensional work. And I'm deliberately calling it extra dimensional, not interdimensional, because there are extra, intra, and inter, and these are actually three different levels when we talk about the different races that are here. And I will apologize in this first video for my voice being a little bit need to be cleared. I was out yesterday power walking and they had chemtrailed, so I'm dealing with a little bit of residual from that one. But today's the day. The energy is today to make this video because we are, those of us who are getting ready for the fifth cycle, we are also getting ready to go into the fifth dimension. And as I go in there, then things will change. This is my roundup of my 15 years of experience with the extra dimensionals and the interdimensionals and the intradimensionals and the metadimensionals. That is just the other races that are in our reality field. And I want to talk a little bit about also solar system or reality field, because this is the new terminology that needs to be learned when we are moving further into the realms of the true propositions and construction in levels of our reality field. And I know I'm using a lot of fancy words here. And you'll say, why not just use the words we are accustomed to from the UFO community and from the researchers and from the ones that have gone before in the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, some began even earlier. There is a reason for that. And you can look at if you're new to this, definitely historically look into all of the ones that have gone before. There are many good people out there who have done a lot of work, but most of it has been from what we could say the outer domain or our reality field perception of things. That is the human interpretation of it. And, where I want to take it is because of the work I've been doing for 15 years now. And I've worked as what's called a releaser. And a releaser is someone that assists what is getting stuck in a system to leave the system and get ready and remodulate it to be able to enter the gate systems, relieve them of their physical form, not killing or anything. We're talking about other dimensional, and here I use another word, other dimensional, because we have dimensions in our reality field as well. We have 9 viable dimensions. The upper 3 are what we call the core domain, and they are not accessible. That's where we have the advanced technologies and construction, design, and architecture of our reality field. So that's not a place where there are entities or living beings as we understand them. They are non-organic. But when we talk about organic life form, we have 9 dimensions in our reality field. So all in all, 12 dimensions. So 9 dimensions where there are actually living life forms, and then the gateway out of this galaxy is via the Andromeda galaxy that is connected to ours. So once you get to the 9th dimension, you exit via the gate system to the Andromeda galaxy. I'm here talking about M31. So with that understanding that there are on the different dimensions of our reality field, which is the solar system, and expanding out beyond our solar system, what we can see with the naked eye and what we can detect within the frequency spectrum, I will remind you that our reality as we know of it is composed of baronic matter, as they call it now, electromagnetic energy, It is only 5% of what is in our universal structure. The other 95% is what they call dark matter and dark energy. And they call it that because they don't know what it is. It's not because it's dark. That has a different understanding when we talk about the different races that are here. The dark ones comes from the third cycle, and they are connected to the lost worlds and the worlds that no longer holds viable genetics, and by that have gone dark. It's like deep space. They come from worlds that are like dead planets, neutron stars in deep space features, which is connected to our universe. Our universe is linked to the third cycle, and that's why it looks as it does. And that's why it has these 5% of what we call the lost world configuration that gives us the features as science are working with and understanding the frequency spectrum. So that's the lost energies imbued with what came of crystallized and solidification of the original holographic radiation, vibration, and energy units that all real reality fields and true worlds are composed of. True worlds are also divided into domains. Outer domain, that is where we have the most dense form of holographic matter. We will call it holographic matter because it's possible to change it. You can shapeshift holographic matter if you like, using your consciousness and your life force to do so. Then we have the middle domain that is less dense, and then we have the inner domain that are what we call merely holographic. They can have physical form, but there they shift in and out all as they please. If they can go to the middle domain, they go to the outer domain, and then take on and sort of organic vessel. And when we here talk organic, we're talking about a life form. We are not talking bionic. Sorry about that. That's really annoying, but I can't wait doing this later. And I know it's going to be the same problem because I have to oil my vocal cord. So we'll just work our way through until I get it all oiled up, and then I'll just continue with this. So bear with this little bit of straining. It will dissipate eventually. Once I'm ready to say if it will go away as I talk, it usually does. So we are having this structure where we understand a reality field is composed of domains. And we could say the inner domain is what we see as galactic level. The middle domain is what we see as stellar or systemic. And the outer domain is what we see as terrestrial. And that is inaccurate because the solidified planets and galaxies and what we're seeing in our system are, as I said, remnants of the third cycle, and they are all dying, which science will tell you as well. These are all collapsing. The black holes are rising up, emerging around in our universal structure as the neutron stars collapse and turns into dust. And that's because we are living on the border of a cycle that we're done with in the last universal cycle. And that's literally unbelievable, ununderstandable how we can still be existing in a cycle that's supposed to have been shut down a long time ago and were de facto shut down a long time ago. But when we were getting ready to elevate into the upcoming universal cycle, when we had completed this universal structure, actually, there were groups of the lineages that were hanging behind the laggards, as I talk about. And then we created this artificial construction called the LPU, Less Progressive Universal Structure, using some of the third cycle energies, but not in the degree that they have become now. We began using fourth cycle energies of a lesser kind, so to speak, to develop that. And that was in the middle domain. And then the outer domain, again, if we're trying to put it into dimensional features, it doesn't add up because dimension 1, 2, and 3, who can exist on the one dimension is just like a dot. It's not even a dot because a dot is kind of a circle. So it's not even a dot because that indicates that it kind of already has 3 dimensions. And if it's just a dot on the paper, it has 2 dimensions. So you can't even draw anything in the first dimension. So therefore, per understanding, there is no dimension 1. But you could say if we, instead of thinking at it as in a kind of developmental process where we go from quantum field to atomic field to molecular, then it begins to make sense. sense. And then we go into what we would call more advanced life forms and even further advanced life forms, and then into what we call life forms with light fields. Then it begins to make sense. So let us say outer domain is where we go from quantum to atomic to molecular, right? But we are now composed of what we could say energy units that are unnatural to the original races of which many of us come from. And I'm not here talking about soul or source or God or creation or anything like that, because if you listen to quite a lot of the ones that have been talking about this, whether you do Alex Collier or you do Dolores Cannon or you do Bashar or do whatever, people keep asking if there is a God and whatever. And that's mostly because it's, let me be a little bit pushy here, but quite a lot of the material comes from America, and Americans are still in their old tribal setting of worshipping some kind of deity, thinking that that's the highest level of existence there is. And I will just put it like this. That has never been part of my work because I come from Denmark and we are not religious in that manner. We are all Viking country. We definitely had our heathen gods, but they were similar to the gods as they were in the Middle Ages and in the old countries as a plethora of gods and not one god. That was something that came with the Baals as the Anunnaki left the Mesopotamian area and the Mardukians took over, the Baals took over. We had the Anunnaki and the Baals, two different. So we had the Anunnaki that were the elves and they were a plethora of gods. And then we had the Baals that came with Marduk, and Baal means the one Lord. So there you have that beginning of one God, one Lord, one superior force that were created by the Mardukians. So he brought that to the table when he took over Mesopotamia, and then it went just downhill, as we know. Because when you begin to have everything under one head, one Godhead, so to speak, then there is a lot of power struggle, there's a lot of hierarchies, and there's a lot of trying to get in the right position under that one God. And if he's a little bit psychopathic and chops off heads as it pleases, then it's a quick route to take out a civilization. So it's not normal to have this one Godhead or whatever. That's the old cycles. That's kind of what we call warrior mentality. You have the leader, you have the followers, you have the warriors, you have whatever that adheres to the one leader that sets the pace for the rest of his tribe. So that's kind of what we call a very distorted version and wrongful use of power and wrongful use of consciousness on all levels. So therefore, it is not logical to work with the idea of a source that then had some kind of personal desire to create itself. And it's interesting because I was listening to Dolores Cannon in some of her interviews. You could find them on the internet. And she talked about how some of she put people into regression and put them up into a deep theta state where she can connect to, it's not the souls of people or their higher selves or whatever you want to put it, or the earlier other dimensional levels of that human that is represented on the table or on the bed. It is more like beyond that, and she gets in contact with the collectives that are behind and are operating inside our reality field. And that's the extrasystemics, the collectives that are operating in our reality field outside our dimensional understanding of quantum field, atomic, and molecular, and are working in the middle domains where they have thriving communities. Many of these are transforming now as the rest of our reality field. And I'll just keep it with the middle domain because the extrasystemics are the middle domain. Our system is the outer domain. The extrasystemics are the middle domain. And then we get into what we call the galactic races, which will be part of the fifth cycle. That's why we work with them. But here, when we are in the dense version of ourselves, and have lost the ability to shapeshift and upgrade our molecular state into becoming what we could call lesser dense organic material where we can begin to build our light body and the true version of life force, and not this downsized version of electromagnetic energy we have in this reality. The Frankenstein body, let us just call it that can be animated using electromagnetic energy, which is unnatural. Just saying, so that's part of the machine worlds. That's how they operate machines inside our reality. Hence their interest in keeping it going, because quite a lot of the technology here are implemented later on by hijacking and colonizing races that's not supposed to be here. So that's just a quick headline on things. But Dolores Cannon talked with some of these extra-systemics, and they told her there is no source, there is no God, there is the infinity field, and I agree on that one. You have that in the Hindu teachings as well, the infinity field, that often by people are being personified, and she gets told, first and foremost, she gets told if it, and Alex Collier says that as well, if it is anything, it's female, and it's female because of the technology in most of the advanced constructions under the ancient ones have a female interface system, because female per se is from the true worlds, not that we are all feminine beings with vaginas in the true worlds, because gender is something that's been invented on this planet, and why it has been a huge tourist attraction, and why many have come by because, I want to experience what it means to fuck another living being, right? So that's a tourist industry that's been going on under some of the scavengers led by Enki, by the way. So that breeding program is a later setup that is very unnatural, not necessary in advanced worlds. Primitive, another being growing out of another being. No, not the way we do it. So that's some of the things that have been put in here as part of the enslavement program. And it is a curse. You know it from the Gospels, and you know it from the Old Testament. Chava, she was punished for eating from the tree of knowledge. And because of that, her punishment were to give birth to children. So we know it's a curse, right? It's not a blessing, even though the Christian Baal Church have been trying very hard to make it so that females will still be subservient to the males and still be taken from his side and still be kept in the version of the enslavement programs that would ensure that her heart field would never activate and begin to transform and vibrate up and reconnect to the original construction core architecture that females in our planet are capable of doing. Males are capable of connecting to what we call the nuts and bolts of the universal architecture. And they are definitely the builders of machines. And we're seeing this mirrored in males and females on our planet. And it is time for us to get back to our true purposes and reorient ourselves into what is the purpose of our existence as humans inside this reality, and how do we transform energy using our bodies to do so, to upgrade our molecular state into what we call middle domain settings, from where we can create the light body or the light structure, perhaps not a full fifth dimensional version of it, but at least in the fourth cycle, we can create an orb so that we can leave. And that's been part of my work with quite a lot of the ones that have been stuck in the fourth dimension in the middle domain, or what we could call the meta organic levels that are done and needs to leave, because many of them got stuck in what we actually could call an artificial fourth dimension that were under the colonizing races. Many of these are what we call regressed races, and I talk about these in the Souls of Humanity. And I know I use the word souls there, but it's easy because in all of my material, I'm taking and everything that's out there, and then I am working with what is out there, figuring out, okay, is there actually something to this terminology? And if it's not, then I kind of build the next level of it, and then I clear out all of the old thought forms that are connected to the old terminology, as well as the technologies that are linked up, cube technology, that are keeping up these programs inside our reality. So that's another part of my work as a retriever and releaser. So you see, when I talk about these things, when we are dealing with the true races, we are not talking about males and females. That is not something that is knowledgeable. So we're talking about breeders and workers. That's males and females inside this reality. We're talking about enslaved races. We're talking incarcerated races. We are talking imprisonment races. We are talking colonizers, hijackers, carvers, tourists, sojourners, traveling throughs, these kind of things, what people are doing. And we are having that already when people meet up and say, what do you do for a living? Right? So we're already having it here, but that's the classification that goes with our genetical purpose and function. It defines our energy system. It comes from our template. It comes from the positions and specialities we have chosen to have being inside a reality field, because being inside a reality field is all about, we will call it work. And then it kind of gets this negative connotation to it, because here we work to earn money and we kind of see it as being in the hamster wheel, which it is, because many are doing work that they don't find interesting or something that they enjoy. But the true work, the true transformational, work that we are to do is because when we began this universal structure, there was a lot of hangovers from the previous universal structure and or cycles. And that was because of wars. That was because of just a series of serious bad choices. And we almost killed each other off, all of us. There were very few. And normally when you have this shift between the universal cycles, you have the top brass that kind of moves on. And that's a collective that connects to the infinity field and then recalibrates themselves and become developed, enormously highly developed, developed consciousness potentials for the next universal cycle, merge with the infinity field, and then are spawned out in a new types of energies that are possible due to the new configuration of the consciousness unit. So that's the top level in what we call the D15 that generates this collective field of consciousness that has been fully developed via the previous or all of the other universal cycles, and then round up the synergetic effect of all existences will then become the foundation of the next set of lineages. And we had a hangover from the D13 collective that were working with the nuts and bolts, the energetic architecture of the reality fields. And as we entered into this one, we were taking over architecture from what's called the ancient ones. So we didn't need the D13 collective. They were kind of the head of the previous universal cycle. So they had power there. And when they got into this one, they were supposed to be the ones that were the sit-overs, the ones that were benched, and they were not happy about that. So 3 of the 4 lineages within the D13 collective under the solar riches kind of deviated. Some of them become the transhuman gender, the machine worlds. The other ones are what we call the technocrats that are becoming the dark ones now. And then we have the parallel universal matrix, which are a completely new group that have reoriented themselves in terms of energy and consciousness configuration to such a degree that their artificial realities are they have used all of the energies of what we call the previous universal cycle, as well as of this one and the LPU, and then re-engineered it all into something completely new. And that is not where I want to go either. These 3 lineages are not really of my interest. But when we talk about the alien agenda, that's from these 3 lineages. That's from the what we call the technocratic dark worlds, the machine worlds, android worlds, as well as the parallel universal matrix races that have, or technically are regressed races, but they have learned to upgrade themselves by the means of parasiting on other systems, which they have been doing here, including the dark ones are also parasiting, but they technically used to be part of the original progressive worlds, but they succumbed to what we call an inversion during the timeline event. So they are the polarity of the true worlds. So they have the same genetic composition as ours, but completely inverted and imbued with what we call no light at all. They are dark light, non-viable genetics, and they do parasite, but they do it in a different way. It's like black holes, they suck everything to them. So that's a different way and consume it and keep it trapped to sustain themselves. So that's a different way of working. And they are using what we call the remnant energies of the timeline event that created what we call the infection of the viable genetics, inverting them and turning them dark. So that's kind of that, just to sum up so you kind of understand the difference. And the grays are grays, bionic, machine things that are artificially created, and they were part of some of the regressed races. They were part of the LPU, but many of these have, because of the regressed races in the top, the hierarchy of the LPU in the middle domain, they died. Or they put themselves in stasis and left the whole thing to be taken care of by the androids. They are called, that group are called the maintainers. Or they are also, Dolores Cannon calls them the caretakers. I call them the maintainers. So they are to maintain these bodies in stasis, and then at some point these bodies are so old so that they evaporate, like mummified, dustification, turn into dust and cease to exist. And then the grace is still there. So they began creating their own community. And kind of when I said Dolores Cannon, I kind of recalled that. I listened to, that was the one I wanted to finish off. Sorry, let me finish that one. Dolores Cannon we're talking about some of these different extrasystemics, and she was asking the typical question. It was in 1999 or the 2000s. So of course she was asking that, similar as Michael Newton also with the whole, is there a God? Is there a source? And Michael Newton also says there is this huge construction from where these little orbs of consciousness are pooped out, so to speak, or come from the nursery. So no source there. You can call that light field the source if you like, but it has no personification whatsoever. It's part of the core construction, where it taps into the infinity field, and then it draws in genetics from the 15 collective, the lineages, the collective of lineages, where there then are being combined infinity field and consciousness potentials into new orb structure. It's no bigger than that. And from that, then energy systems and template or architecture can be created, having different functionality. And of course, all depending on which world we're talking about. If it's the machine worlds, they don't have access to the infinity field, which is why they will eventually cease to exist. The dark worlds have not either, and the parallel universal matrix have not either, but they have created their own version of it, which is very, very interesting. And I'm taking out these spheres that are working with what we call the Newton field of our reality field, and are based upon quantum dynamics and quantum energies. So that's why they're here as well. They're very interesting in what we say the huge portion of quantum energy that we technically have in our solar system still, because it has not been harnessed yet. So that's interesting. So we are a little bit of background information there. But Dolores Cannon, you see, I keep slipping out of it. She got this information, and then she's having one of her lectures, and then it doesn't take her much before she slips back. She gets this infinity field, and then she slips back and and the infinity field decided that he wanted to explore realities. And they said, oh yeah, you slip right back into the program, right? So that's not how it is. An infinity field has no gender. It can't be a he or she, because that's determined by our reality field, and is determined by penises and vaginas, which we're seeing in the new kids on the block that are non-gender. They have got fluid genders. Their body might have one gender, but their personality matrix is fluid. If it determines it wants to be female, it can. If it determines it wants to be male, it can. And now with the understanding of the hormones and surgery, it's easy to transform the physical vessel into fit the consciousness gender, if you like, because it goes with either humanoid or it goes with what we call of the more progressive race orientation, where we understand that these are consciousness features that goes in different directions. So we will, in the years to come, reorient ourselves as a civilization and get out of the gender orientation and gender features and seeing each other as males and females. And that's why beginning to work with Esther Grace are doing as well. We're talking about XX humans or YX humans, and then we'll have the next group that will have a different configuration. Then we won't call it X and Y. We will call it the trio genome or the quarter genome or the penta genome. So we're beginning to have a new terminology coming in there as well. And that will wipe away all of these old programs of workers and breeders and genders and males and females and partnerships and falling in love and family setting. And the whole lot is on its way out, which is why we've got the new hybrid kits that are showing us a different way of being human. So that's part of some of the new inserted. They are from the Pell Universal Matrix, though, so we could always discuss whether or not we are completely happy about having humans with a high degree of insectoid type of genetics that gives them this fluent perception of what they are as an organic vessel. We're seeing that in the insectoid kingdom as well. We just saw it with a bunch of turtles. I think it was in Florida because of the heat in the ocean. All the turtles are now born female. But if it were cooler, some of them would have become males. We're also seeing with different insects. I think it's praying mantis, isn't it? Some of them, they can shift gender if necessary. If there's too many females in the gene pool, then they can shift into males, or the other way around. Or in states where there are, with the environment, we're seeing that with quite a lot of animals in the environment that is kind of coming into what we could say distress. It is more normal for the litter to be of female orientation and then fewer males, because technically you only need one male to impregnate 5 females, right? That's all. That's the breeder males work and breed. That's all you're engineered to do, even within the animal kingdom. So that's some of the things that needs to be cleared out, and that's part of the new reality program I'm going to talk about. And if you ask me, do I think this is the right way to do it? Am I all thumbs up and yeah, yoo-hoo, there you go? No, not at all, because this is so far from the original Pillar Project developmental programs that I took part of in the original solar system when we entered here and were working under the ancient ones. So of course I'm not saying, oh yeah, that's so fucking good, but it is what it is. It's like trying to fight against a rainy day. We know it's weather modification, but let us just play with that idea as an analogy. It's raining and you can say, I don't like rain, and you can be mad and you can scream and you can shout and you can go out and try to beat the rain or catch the drops and put them to fire or whatever. But it doesn't change the fact it is out of your control. And that is where we are now. Things are happening around us, and that's why I've taken the time to say, okay, as I did with my series on my take on Buddhism, this is me rounding up the 4th cycle knowledge, what I've been working with since 2007, and then put it into what we say some kind of lecture that I'm going to put out here for free. There are a lot of what we could say, what does this then mean in terms of in my personal history? That's in the perception logs if you're interested in that. But there's also a lot of deeper explanations of things I've just given the headlines of here. Some of the what went wrong in the Pillar Project, why we got the timeline event, who instigated the experimentation with the 3rd cycle energies, and more of my releaser function, more about the council. So that's my personal take. I'm not going to write it as a book. It's easier to do a podcast. Just doing here 45 minutes of talk will take me 3 days to edit and write and do whatever, so it stands as clear as possible, because the written word is very diminished way of sharing information. But some things needs to be written, and I'm working on creating a new type of book where I'll begin to work with the 5th dimensional sciences, the middle domain, the middle of the middle domain sciences. Because when we begin to create a pattern, then the written word is good. But once it is created, the understanding of the pattern and the work with the complex information system goes more and more into energy. So it kind of goes from the symbol making, the pattern making in the book. That is the frame of reference. It's a pattern construction using symbols, which we kind of call words. If it were of the original origin, the symbols would look quite different. More in alignment with what we could call the symbols that we have from some of the tablets that have been found on Easter Island, or some Sanskrit, Pali, some of these very, very ancient languages, or you could say ancient Hebrew. We still don't really know if ancient Hebrew is really ancient Hebrew or just some kind of what we call lesser developed, non-literary attempt to mimic the Egyptian letter system, as well as the hieroglyphs, putting into some kind of when they left Egypt, not in the story of with Moses, but there were people that left. Some of the original Jews actually comes from the Hyksos lineages of Egypt and traveled from Egypt to the land of Israel or Judea at the time, and they were nomads. There were a lot of nomads in these areas. So had they been there and then tried to create their own? Because if you look at some of the earliest inscriptions of the Hebrew language, it's very naive and infantile. So that would be my best guess. And I'm not to offend anyone. Every civilization has its beginning and its tryouts and its chaos and its attempts to do whatever. I'm just putting it as an example where we use the written word, and eventually we develop that and becomes more advanced as we develop the language, the written word, the language. We create a new terminology. I'm doing the exact same thing. St. Paul did the same thing in the Gospels. He was Greek, but he was also Jew, and he had to create a language that was suitable for the pagans or the heathens that he was trying to Christianize, with his perception after he had his vision of a light being of some sort coming to him and rendering him blind for a couple of days. We could say, was it a gray and an overlay, one of the Baals that said it's about time we shift this orientation out of the Jews and their ways of doing this and trying to take over Israel, Judea, and create a new branch of humans that would adhere to the one Lord under the Baals? Or were Yahweh already Baal and then they needed another one? We don't know these things, but that's part of what these exosystemics that have chosen to come inside our reality field or our world enclosure, which it has become 15,000 years ago when it was hijacked under some of the Draco races and were colonized, and humans got enslaved, and that's the new version of humans we have today. So that's part of that story. And then all of the religions are based upon these different exosystemics or alien races that came in and tried to have some of them were tourists, seriously. And while they were here living some 1,000 years or so, they created a lot of havoc. And since they were living through several generations and humans were only living 50 years, 60 years, well, they had this kind of beginning to create what we call the bloodlines, and they then created some of their structures of society as we have today. So that's the remnant of that one, of some of the different quote unquote deities that have been here and been the founders of different religions, and with that different bloodlines that had their genetics inserted via specific females that then interbred with them. You know the story of the Nephilim, right? So the false gods, which is how I will translate them, not giants, as when I studied at the University of Copenhagen, I did my bachelor degree in theology. We studied the Old Testament in Hebrew, and there Nephilim is translated with giants. And that's just scholars deciding that. I would say it's not the giants, it's some of these other dimensional races that have come here and decided that they wanted to become part, and they want to create their own lineages inside this reality, which is the bloodline. So notice the difference here between the lineages and the root races are part of the original configuration of the universal structure, and the bloodlines are the ones that came about by being interbred with by some of these incoming extraterrestrials, if you like, that were breeding with some of the females, and by that created a specific type of offspring that then became what we call the kings and the nobilities and the ones in charge of their domain. They literally interbred so that they would have what we could call landlords inside this reality. And the landlords, of course, later on felt they needed more power and then became kings. And then we had the whole issue going on again with power and the struggle for power and who was on top and who was below, especially when these extra-dimensional or extraterrestrials decided, yeah, we're done here, I'm pulling out, which they have done. Marduk pulled out 5 5 years ago or something, in a big kaboom with thunder and what have you. So when they do that, then whatever's left will then begin to collapse. And while these towers of power collapses, then the organization and the hierarchical structure within will collapse as well. And the ones in power will try to get more power, because once the top brass is gone, that position is vacant. And then the next one will try to fight to get it. You know that, you've seen that in the course of human history. For instance, The Fall of Civilization, which is a good YouTube podcast series that you can find. It's called The Fall of Civilizations on YouTube, done by a young historian. And he talks about how these, I remember that one in Africa, because that's one of the ones we haven't heard much of. Some of these royals in Africa, actually, we haven't heard most of them about them, and what they did and how they fought to get power, how they literally eradicated each other and the royal lineages, as same as we saw it in Mesopotamia, and we've seen it in Babylon, and we've seen it in Egypt, and we see wherever. Once the gods are gone, then the bloodlines begin to fight each other to get the top level and the power, and then they literally slaughter each other off. So that's a quick way to shut down a civilization that is unnatural and shouldn't have been about to begin with. So that's just from the fourth seeding after the reseeding of the eradication and destruction of the continent of Atlantis. And Atlantis is not part of our planet anymore. It is sunken into the sea, and it is not present anywhere on our planet, but some of the racial grids were reseeded in the fourth seeding, and that's why people kind of think that Atlantis could be in America. But that idea technically came from Madame Blavatsky, that thought that the sixth root race were going to be born in America on the West Coast, or around California, Florida, whatever. That's not West Coast, but that whole area down there. And I know you'll say, well, that's not the correct geography. Sorry about that. But it was supposed to be around California, and that over with the San Andreas fault line. And I deliberately call it fault, because there's a pocket of All Souls stuck there, which were to be the ones that should be reseeded into what we call the understanding from Blavatsky of the new sixth root race, which in my opinion is completely incorrect. But that was what she thought, and that's why she traveled to America, and that's why Bailey later on, Alistair Bailey later on, also went to America. And you can then say it's kind of the Great White Brotherhood and the lunar Syrian A lineages that thought that that was where they could recreate their sixth root race. But this does not mean it's the sixth root race for the entire human population, because we've got 12 universal lineages. So be mindful when we're working with this information that there are different groups here, there are different extra systemics, there are different extra dimensionals, there are different type of otherworldly races here as well. They all have an agenda. They want to make us believe that they are the top brass of the hierarchy. We have got the pillars of power that are vacant now because the old gods, the old regressed races, the top brass of the bloodlines are gone. The bloodlines are deteriorating because of it. So they are interbreeding. They are fighting to get power. They are using dirty methods to get more powers. They are calling and invoking underworld forces to rejuvenate their genetic lineages or bloodlines. And this is not going well. They're contaminating themselves. We are seeing that in some of the military projects that went terribly wrong. Things are not going well because we are a reality field in free fall now. And that's some of the things we need to understand with the new reality programs that's been inserted. And the reason why I haven't worked with it more than I have, I've known this information since 2018 that the new reality program would come, but that's because I interpret it as manipulation, because I was still seeing viability. But the last 3 years, now I see the clear evidence, not just because I'm being manipulated to perceive it that way. I can see people are falling apart, literally. They are deteriorating. Their organic vessels are decomposing. The energy fields are not working well. The old programs are gone. And yes, I definitely taken my part in shutting down the artificial fourth, but that was actually an attempt to try and revitalize stabilize our reality field. If we take away everything that's draining it of energy, then perhaps it will stand. But as these technologies began to fall apart and the races they left, because they have left in droves, nobody's maintaining anything. Even the maintainer grays are falling apart because they have kind of got addicted to sexual energies, and they got all hooked up to porn and their hybrid projects, which they try to create a human form or a new masters that they could align themselves with. They got all hooked up on porn and sexual energies, and we have many of you that are under these programs. You struggle with this enormously strong power that keeps pushing you in the directions of what we call the old Enki programs of fornication and breeding and whores and underworld stuff. So this is not going so well here. So something radical needs to happen. And again, not because I think it's okay, but when there are no one of us of the original solar system that have risen to the occasion and got ourselves equipped to be able to work multidimensionally, and by that create a new council from where we could take control of this reality field. Not really unfolded. And those of us who've been trying to do so, we have been smacked so hard that I'm still, because of my time in Australia, where I actually tried to get some of these things up and running. The smacking I got was to such a degree that portions of me are still like the little kitten sitting in the corner after being kicked so hard, that is still sitting there trying to get just a little bit of dignity back and licking its paws and pretending everything is fine. You know how cats do when they're not happy. Little poor things, right? Little reptilian dark one infused things. But anyways, so that's why I'm not out there trying to do anything, also because the ones have been trying to get there, it was not the time. Perhaps there will be a later time with the new reality programs. There are still there is this saying, we are allowed to do it, but it's not the same as they will let us do it. So that's some of the things I will discuss later on. What are the implications of these new reality programs, and how sovereign are we really? We were not sovereign in the last 15,000 years, even though it were pretended to be so. That was a good way to get us started, at least with some of the incoming races during the stellar activation cycle, when they came in and activated what was left of their lineages so they could pull out the gene pool and leave the physical vessels inside this reality field and their energy system to decompose and dematerialize, so that they had no timeline connection to our reality field, because it has been known, and I already got the visions of it when I was 13, that this world, this galaxy is falling into the abyss. It's falling into the third cycle because it's made of it. And if there's nobody to keep it in the fourth cycle and in the fifth cycle, having viable genetics to do so, then it must go where it must go due to the laws of energetic and genetic affinity. And since most humans now are third cycle humans, they are only composed of electromagnetic energies. And the viable genetics of whatever was here of the different groups from the middle domain has pulled out, well, then the new center point of existence will be in the middle domain. And that's the transition that we are to do. And that's why we must complete the fourth cycle, get into the middle domain by doing so, create the light body that's necessary, learn to work with the holographic sciences, create the new frames of references, the new technologies, the new understanding of science, the new understanding of selves, others, and reality field, as well as the new understanding of who and what we truly are. And that reorientation will be the first step of recreating our ability to exist within the middle domain. And I think that's suitable to end this first video here. Thank you.